A federal judge in Seattle has temporarily blocked President Trump's executive order to end birthright citizenship in the United States, calling the order, quote, blatantly unconstitutional. It's the first formal legal challenge to one of the executive actions Trump took in his first 4 days in office. The attorneys general in Washington, Oregon, Arizona, and Illinois filed a joint suit against the order. At least 18 other states across the country are also challenging the legality of the order. Washington State Attorney General Nick Brown discussed today's decision.
That we will not shy away from taking action against illegal actions by the President of the United States or anyone else. This is step one. We have a long way to go. There are many other orders that are being issued by the President that will have potential impacts on people. But we are really relieved, frankly, that at least this court has seen the blatant unconstitutional action of this president. And now we're back to the status quo. We're back to the rule that has been the law of this land now for generations, that you are an American if you were born in the United States. Thank you very much, everyone.
President Trump and his allies argue that birthright citizenship creates an incentive for people to come to the U.S. illegally in order to give birth. Section 1 of the 14th Amendment reads, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to their jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. For more on this, I want to bring in CBS News political reporter Olivia Rinaldi. Olivia, this effort to end birthright citizenship will clearly be a lengthy legal process. This is just a temporary block. Is the Trump administration responding yet to these hurdles or to today's decision?
Yeah, Lindsay, it's good to be with you. We have not heard yet from the Trump administration, but I would expect that they are going to fight to get this executive order that Trump has put forth passed and put into law, especially banning birthright citizenship. Of course, that's something that's in the Constitution. You heard the judge when they delivered that temporary order saying that there has never been another case where the question presented is as clear as this one, going on to say this is a blatantly unconstitutional order. But what we're starting to see here is really the beginning of the resistance from attorney generals across Democratic states in the U.S. pushing back against Trump's executive orders. You heard there from the Washington attorney general that this is just the beginning. They're planning to keep fighting not only this executive order, but several others as well.
Let's also talk about the border. Thousands of active duty troops are being deployed there. What more do we know about the White House's directive for what they'll be doing?
Yeah, we know that some of those active duty troops are just starting to make their way to the border. Some of them already there. There are about 1,500 that will be there. About 1,000 of them are Army personnel, 500 are Marines, and some of those Marines were actually over in California fighting some of those wildfires that we've been tracking over the last several weeks. So notable there that they're being pulled to now go down to the southern border and take part in what they're calling a mission to really limit immigration coming into the U.S. So we know that they'll be there to help build some temporary physical barriers to prevent people from coming over the border. But there is also going to be airlift support missions that the military is taking part in. Now, what this is supposed to do is to help deport some of those migrants that are in custody by Customs and Border Patrol. So they'll be assisting in that. Quite major news that we heard yesterday about the military coming down here. And our own Camilo Montoyo Galvez even reporting that as many as 10,000 troops could be heading down to the southern border. So this is just the start of this. A lot more news on this, I'm sure, in the coming months.
We heard from the president speak virtually at the World Economic Forum in Davos today. It's the first time in his second term Trump has made remarks to an international audience. What was his message, and how did he set the tone for his next 4 years in office?
Well, Trump speaking to world leaders today for that first time of his second administration, but he said his message, at least on economics, was pretty clear. Either come to the U.S. and make your products here and enjoy low taxes, or pay a tariff. So that was his messaging today to the members of Davos who were there, but also talking about the war in Ukraine, asking NATO members to increase their GDP spending on the military to about 5%, something he had talked about in his first administration as well. So bringing back a lot of the typical Trump brass that we saw in that first administration, levying tariffs, asking NATO to contribute more to their own defenses in this messaging that he gave today in Switzerland.
The president also spoke with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman as his first call with a foreign leader since taking office. How significant is it that this was his first foreign interaction of his second term, and what did they discuss?
Yeah, it is quite notable. We know during Trump's first administration, his first international trip was to Saudi Arabia. That was a significant showing there that he values that relationship. He values the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia, wants to lean into it a little bit more. So the fact that this was his first phone call was quite notable in that sense. Of course, you know, during the Biden administration, there wasn't exactly an embrace of Saudi Arabia. Biden had struggled really with that relationship, whether even to shake his hand when he visited Saudi Arabia. So notable there that Trump is making that phone call. He said of it that Mohammed bin Salman is a, quote, fantastic guy. And he talked about the Saudi plans to invest about $600 billion in the U.S. over the next 4 years, Trump quipping that he would like to see that be up to $1 trillion. And he's going to ask for that. He even said earlier this week that perhaps he would mimic what he did in his first administration and make Saudi Arabia his first international trip of this second administration. So a lot we will be following to see whether Trump follows through on that promise, Lindsay.
Olivia Rinaldi, thank you.